Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mining Now. I'm your host, Jared Downey, and today I'm excited to announce this is going to be the third episode of the three-part series with Falkirk, and we're going to dig into, on this episode, it's going to be really focused on the water side. First episode we had Mike McPhee, Executive Chairman, Founding and Author at Falkirk Consultants, and then we had Jennifer Turner, who is the President and Founding Partner at Falkirk. So that was it kind of gave us a snapshot of the company, some of the challenges in the industry, the growth of the company, and now we have Ryan Burgess. He is the Project Funding and Water Stewardship, right?
Correct.
At Falkirk, and then Nadia Langenberg. She is the Water Resource and Hydrotechnical Specialist at Falkirk. Thank you both for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, Nadia, we'll start with you. When did you start with Falkirk?
I just started about 2 months ago, so I'm still fairly new.
And they put you in an interview.
Jumping right in. So
There you go. Wow. I would say, well, what's your background?
I have a background about 5 years in consulting engineering, so with more of a focus on hydraulics and river engineering. Transitioning to Falkirk, I'm now more on the hydrology side and bringing in that hydraulics experience as well.
2 months. You might have the record for least amount of time first up on the show. So that's a great compliment. So it's going to be fun to dig into some of these topics with you. And then for you, Ryan, how long have you been with them?
I started in
2 weeks.
a couple days, just a couple days. No, I started in mid 2021, which somehow, I mean, it's only 3 years ago, but makes me a bit of a vet. So yeah. I mean, when I joined Falkirk, I mean, I was like the 10th person. And now we're over 50. So
it's crazy.
It's been growing for sure, and adding lots of good folks like Nadia, who's here with me in the line of fire 2 months in. But no, it's been a super fun journey and great outfit to work with. Did
you have a sense of the growth that you would see from them when you started?
I mean, obviously nobody can truly predict the future, but I mean there was definitely some noise. The mining industry is really small, and it's kind of hard to keep a low profile if you're doing good work. So we actually, at my previous employer, I previously worked for a water treatment engineering firm. So I did a lot of work with Falkirk, providing inputs to the permitting process.
Oh, I see.
For kind of specific water treatment capacity, and had a lot of interface, particularly with Max Brownhill, who's the third founding partner, other than Mike and Jen, who you had on the show. So yeah, lots of work with Max, had some work with Mike previously as well. So like there were definitely touch points before I joined, and that's kind of what gave me the confidence in the competence of the group and the growing company to make the jump over and join.
What brought you to the company, if you don't mind me asking?
Really, I was excited to join a smaller company that was growing and doing really good work. I think Falkirk's overall approach to the mining industry fit well with what I like to do as well. I think they have a really good level of environmental consciousness. The whole water stewardship group, the motives behind that are really solid. I wanted to get some more experience in hydrology and broaden the experience I currently have. And at the end of the day, it just seemed like a really great fit. So I jumped in and have been hitting the ground running ever since.
Yeah, and you worked, everybody can see it on your LinkedIn when they go click on it. So you worked for Hatch. I mean, you've got experience at a very high level very high level organization.
Yes, a very large organization, more not within mining. So I'm new to the mining industry as well. My background is mostly in flood management, dam breach assessments, and hydraulic design. So it's really interesting to see how those two things, hydrology and hydraulics, can come together and create a really well-rounded approach.
Well, welcome to the mining industry. I just talk about the mining industry at this point, so I'm not sure if I can consider myself in it. So I don't know if I can say welcome, but I'll say it anyway.
Let's talk about our Heavy Industry World Tour, brought to you by Savannah Equipment, supplying mining equipment worldwide. And Corporate Traveler Canada, helping companies travel the globe simpler, faster, easier. We are heading to events across North America and Australia and filming episodes on location. Email us at info@crownsman.com to be part of Crownsman's Heavy Industry World Tour. Did you know cementitious binders can be responsible for up to 70% of the total GHG footprint of mine backfilling processes? Now you can replace up to 50% of the binder in your mine backfill operations with Graybond, Graybond's new low-carbon cementitious binder. This lime-based alternative binder maintains a 40 to 70% lower GHG footprint compared to typical cement and can adapt to varying mine conditions without compromising performance. Learn more about Graybond at graybond.com. CIM is Canada's leading technical institute dedicated to the sustainability of our industry. Members enjoy professional growth opportunities through CIM libraries, publications, webinars, societies, and the job board. Experience the CIM community firsthand at the Conference of Metallurgists, August 19th to 22nd, iCard, September 16th to 20th, and the CIM Health and Safety Conference, October 6th to 8th. Visit CIM.org for more information and join CIM today.
Let's talk about water stewardship just on a high level. Maybe, Ryan, start with you. Is just where does the discussion start?
Great question. I can kind of take you back to the thought process that we were having internally in kind of putting this team together. So part of the reason I got brought over to Falkirk was my previous work with Mike and water treatment, and the kind of origin story of Falkirk started with kind of permitting and approvals and managing environmental assessments and permit applications like Mines Act, Environmental Management Act permit applications here in BC. And then as the companies kind of got more experience and evolved and grown, we've added these kind of, practice areas, I think is how we refer to them, to address specific gaps and specific stumbling points that we see consistently with every single permit application. So, the first one was indigenous engagement. So Christy Smith's our VP of indigenous engagement, and she has an incredible group that does really good work. So, making sure that we were really tight on indigenous engagement was important. And then the second one was just water, and I mean, like Mike and Jen and Max and the rest of the team, they don't have scientific backgrounds specific to, water and water resources and water management, water stewardship, but they kept seeing this issue coming up again and again. And just the level of scrutiny and, the desired level of investigation and the detail required on the water piece, they said, okay, like we got to solve this problem, get out ahead of it. So the water team is kind of how it was on the drawing board. At first, it was myself and one of my colleagues, Eric Skirius. He's a very high level water modeler. So he's kind of the brains behind the operation, putting all these predictive models together. And it was kind of him and I going, okay, we need to build a water team. What do we do here? And then, the next real piece of the puzzle was adding Apurva Galamudi, who's our water stewardship practice lead. And we were thinking, okay, we need to build this water team. We need to not just do the bare minimum of addressing, like checking the boxes on permit applications, but, how do we approach this from a holistic point of view? And how do we kind of meaningfully address the issue of water when it comes to, mines and mine sites in the mining industry moving forward? So, the word stewardship was chosen very carefully because traditionally, I think in the past, you hear, and you still hear it a lot, water management. So like if you think of the word management and the definition of management, it's like, you're controlling something.
Yeah.
You're being very kind of specific and prescriptive with it. Whereas the word stewardship is more about, taking care of something and caring for a resource. So, we were very intentional in calling it the water stewardship practice area, because that kind of perspective and that motive is built in of, water is an incredibly valuable resource. And, in the past on a mine site, water is just something that happens to be there. And like, yeah, you need some of it to run your process and whatever, but the rest is just kind of, it's not valuable. It's waste. It's a problem to be kind of disposed of, whereas now I think everyone's perspective is shifting to water, and like water is an incredibly valuable commodity, and you need to be very, considerate about what you're doing with water on your mine site, because typically, a lot of these mine sites they're high up in the mountains, they're near headwaters, they're kind of like where the water starts in its journey, so what we do to the water at the mine site has an impact on all the water users downstream. And that could be, tens, hundreds of indigenous communities, First Nations, residential areas. People are using this water to, drink themselves, water their fields, feed their livestock, all these things. So, having a perspective of stewardship and caring for the water and making sure that it's being taken care of properly, I think is a really important thing to think about.
Nadia, I'm curious, coming into now this industry, had you already had experience with the stakeholder conversation, which is really heightened in mining?
Yeah, I had to a degree. Definitely, one thing I've noticed coming into the mining industry is it becomes that much more important. And especially like Ryan said, we're starting at headwaters, and the impacts of that filter all the way through down to many, many different stakeholders, and their use of water and the value they place on water is very diverse. So I think just building off of what Ryan said about, management versus stewardship, management feels like it has very clear-cut boundaries and a start and an end, where stewardship, I think, leaves a lot more space to bring in those diverse perspectives to really listen to the stakeholders that are going to be involved in these projects.
At Corporate Traveler, their seamless combination of expert service and innovative booking tech means you have what you need when you need it. Mining companies need experienced agents who know how to get you to far-to-reach destinations with ease, who understand rotational crew travel, chartering, and so much more. And with an average tenure of 8 years, their agents are the best in the biz and are experts at managing all your mining travel needs. Have an emergency? They've got your back 24/7, anywhere, on any device. Don't get stuck with complicated and rigid travel options. Get it done with Corporate Traveler. Visit them at corptraveler.com. Attention builders, we've got everything you need to know about the grit and grind of the construction world in one show. The Construction Show is where you can share your expert techniques and strategies to help keep the crew strong and construction sites secure. From foundational tips, industry trends, safety strategies to advanced equipment and machinery. Be part of the voice of construction. Book your episode and showcase your company to millions worldwide. Visit crownsman.com.
And how is that done? And if either one of you want to jump in on this, is just how do you even facilitate all the stakeholders? I mean, we try to have a conversation about, putting up a wall. you get 3 or 4 people talking. Everybody's going to have. I mean, they literally want the boards the opposite way. That was me. But stakeholders, it's we sometimes talk about it in here. Well, this is all friendly terms. Stakeholders, it's a very intense thing. When you're talking about indigenous rights, you're talking, like you're saying, about farmers, fishing, municipalities. I mean, it's an intense conversation. I don't even know where to start that part of the conversation. How do you help companies facilitate or even think about it?
I mean, it's a good question, and you're right. It is a very complex kind of web of people and communities and entities that care. And I mean, people really care about water, and you've always seen that level of caring and interest and like placing the magnitude of importance on water. Like, that's always been there with indigenous communities. I feel like, the kind of the Western communities, for lack of a better way of phrasing it now, like I said, in the past, there wasn't a lot of consideration for water. It was a thing that is there, and we've always had it, and we always will have it. And
in Canada, we got lots of it.
We're just Canada. We got plenty of water, but I think now people are, with all the new kind of science on climate change and the increased awareness of the fact that, water is a finite resource, there's a lot more importance being placed on it from all angles. And, when you look at these permit applications that we go through, like there's in BC specifically, there's these joint application information requirements is what it's called, this, the kind of meshing of the requirements from the 2 main ministries that review these permit applications. And there's a specific chapter on, water modeling and water quality and what they call mitigation. So like mitigating measures to protect the water quality and things like that. And that, when you're going through the permit review process, that is kind of the center of the whole thing. Mining companies get really worked up about how are we going to design our mine and how are we going to optimize production and how are we going to, save 2% in costs at the mill or something like that. But when you get into it with the ministries reviewing and the communities, honestly, they don't really care how they're running the mine as long as they're protecting the environment and they're not discharging deleterious substances or bad quality water over the fence. So the water modeling and the mitigation measures are super, super critical. And that's where a lot of people really want to come sit down at the table and make sure that they really, really understand what is being proposed and what will be done to protect that water quality.
Do you think because there's that understanding across the industry, it provides an opportunity for people to get on the same page quicker? And I'm actually referring to getting mines, like the value ultimately the mines want to get actually developed.
Yeah.
Because it's getting clearer and clearer, do you think people are getting on the same page? Does it provide, right now it's maybe a bit of a bottleneck, but moving forward, could it be an opportunity because the education is starting around, people can get on the same page quicker, or are we looking at a kind of a continued bottleneck?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think conceptually everyone is on board with the importance of, acting as a responsible steward for water and being responsible to the environment and not discharging poor quality water. I don't think mining companies aren't on board with that as kind of a responsibility and a list of things that they need to live by. But I think sometimes it can be a bit jarring when you sit down and actually explain to them the amount of work involved to get to, to get to a place of a high level of confidence and certainty around this stuff. Like just the multidisciplinary teams of people required to, tie all the pieces together on this project. As a consulting company, you put your budget together and your scope of work, and sometimes it can make people's heads spin. Like, oh my God, this isn't going to be ready in like a month. It's hard to reconcile the stated desire to really put in the effort required to address this while also being beholden to, project schedules and corporate schedules and what you're communicating to, executive boards and shareholders about maintaining timelines. Like, unfortunately, sometimes this takes the work and the time that it takes to get it done right. And I think that going forward, I would hope that, mining companies consider that this isn't just like a nice to have, like this is absolutely mandatory work that they have to do, and kind of, giving it the time and, time and space, the time required to go through the process properly and actually kind of run these issues to ground will be beneficial going forward. And oftentimes, doing it right the first time might, just use an example, like it might take another month of work to kind of fill in the gaps and make sure all the loose ends are tied on the water modeling front. So you're submitting your permit application a month later, but if you have all those gaps and those loose ends, when you get into the review phase, in my experience, find that the back and forth with the ministry to actually solve that, and then having to go to all these various, community members and stakeholders you were mentioning before and kind of allay their concerns about that can take more time than it would have to just, pump the brakes a bit and go, okay, we have a couple gaps here. Let's take the month that we need to address it to kind of set us up for a smooth process going forward.
Negative compounds faster than positive. So if you have a gap and it starts going that direction, it can compound quite quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that phrase. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Thank you.
I probably stole it
I've
from
often
someone else.
tried to convey that concept, but never so succinctly. So I'm going to be using that.
There you go. That'll I'll send you the bill. Now, when Ryan was talking, what came to my mind is I can't use specific 2 months. There's only so many projects you could have worked on. But you said you've worked on dams, right? What Ryan's talking, you must understand this. I mean, if there's something that has layers and there's literally no forgiveness at all. So if you have anything to add to what Ryan was talking about, just with your experience.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that came to mind while I was listening to Ryan, and considering that, in my 2 months, I've seen relatively little of the whole picture, but one thing that does stand out is I think if there is an opportunity to be had, it's that this issue of water stewardship is bringing together multiple stakeholders to the discussion. And while those conversations aren't always comfortable or easy, and there's going to be lots of bumps, it's bringing people together to talk. And I think that is really powerful and makes me really optimistic and excited to see what it's like in this industry in a year, 2 years, 5 years and onwards.
Yeah.
And I think that it's I think it's almost a little bit poetic that it's water that's bringing us
Yeah.
to the table altogether.
Yeah, well, it's not a new thing actually. Water has it's wars have been fought over it, and unity's been had over it as well, right? It is that thing historically. Is just to sort of expand on it a little bit though. Are you in your role? Will you be front facing? Will you be dealing directly with clients?
I think the exciting part about working with a smaller growing company is I anticipate that there will be those opportunities. And I know I have a lot of great resources already within Falkirk, with Ryan and Apurva and others to set that example. But yeah, I absolutely would love to get into that role, get that experience and see how I can contribute.
And just sort of circling back, but that experience you have with projects because dams are, that is community. That's you're literally blocking water with lives underneath it. It is. I don't know if there's anything in water that's more intense than the dams. But that experience, instinctively, I would think just with that experience, your default would be to slow down, given Ryan's point earlier, not speed up with that background, right?
Absolutely. Yes, and the point that we brought up about doing it right the first time, I think it's so important. Yes, there could be upfront costs and time associated with that, but I think those pale in comparison to the impacts of doing things wrong, so to speak, or running into consequences or impacts down the line that we're not prepared for. So yes, absolutely. It's definitely worth the time to slow down, to make sure that everyone who has a stake is heard and put together a best path forward for everyone involved.
Well, and as Ryan loves to say, negative compounds,
Yes,
right?
exactly. What a great expression.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the technical aspect, and sort of get into the weeds a little bit on it, because consulting is if you're just hearing about it and you don't get specific, people can have a lot of opinions. We're going to, bring people together. We're going to outline your vision. You know the drill. But Falkirk is not. They've got a lot of depth on their team. As I've gotten to know the company, I figured out pretty quickly. Oh, this is. These aren't just a couple consultants who got together and want to give an opinion. Can we talk a little bit just about the technical prowess? You already touched on a couple people, but I'd like to dig into a little bit more for people watching, just the level that your team is coming with.
No, fair enough. And yeah, it is. Every once in a while, I talk to someone and they go, "Well, what do you do?" And I go, "Okay, which layer do we want to get into here?" And sometimes I just go, "Oh, I work in consulting," and they're like, "Oh, you're one of those." You just talk to people and charge a bunch of money. But I do think that at Falkirk, there's always been a huge emphasis placed on hiring really, really good people with really strong skill sets and strong backgrounds and good subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
So, we're starting.
Well, starting with the founders. The founders are.
Well, exactly. You look at someone like Mike. He's held almost every role you could possibly hold in the mining industry. Max was the mine manager at the Britannia mine for a year, so that's just a little mine. Kind of a big deal. Jen, tons of depth of experience, managing EA processes. So starting with the founding partners, they've been in the trenches, they've worked in those roles, they know exactly what our clients are going through. And the whole ethos behind Falkirk is acting in an owner's representative capacity and, acting as if we own the project and with, the project and the owner's best considerations in mind. So, earlier I was saying, oh, we got to pump the brakes, we got to slow down, we got to do everything right. And that's true. But at the same time,
Yes.
we are beholden to schedules and milestones, and you need to kind of keep the pace up. So, it's our job to kind of find that balance between ensuring that it is done correctly, because it has to be done, while also, motivating our team and all the other teams that, frequently on these projects, we end up in a very kind of, hub and spoke type thing where we're working with a ton of other different consulting companies as part of a, collective team to drive these projects forward. So, making sure that everyone's bought in on the project and where we have to go and how and when we have to get there is super important. But, that the expertise is super important there. You can work with other companies and, they've got sometimes they throw their junior folks to the wolves a little bit, and they haven't necessarily, walk the walk, so to say, but they're talking a lot of talk. And sometimes you get stuck in a position where, something's stuck. You don't really know where to go with it. A lot of the folks on our team, they've been there, they've done that. They know what to do. They know how to kind of unstick these things and move it forward in a way that respects, corporate priorities and schedule, while also maintaining quality and the good quality of the work.
Are you getting into things like modeling and risk management? Like, how deep are you going with the work that you're actually delivering to the client?
You mean me personally, or
no, Falkirk?
Oh, I mean, yeah. We do very sophisticated predictive water quantity and quality modeling. There's a whole risk assessment component with that. First you have to generate the numerical outputs. You go through the modeling process, and I'm speaking specifically just kind of to water and water modeling here, because we do multi-criteria analysis and risk assessment on all kinds of other components of the project as well. Strength of relationships and trust with communities and indigenous and First Nation communities, just general project risks outside of the water space too. But in the water stewardship group specifically, we do a lot of modeling. We really kind of dig into the numbers and make sure that there's a really solid basis and foundation from which to move forward, and kind of think holistically about how the project moves forward. Are there any risks? How do we mitigate those? How do we kind of solve the problems before they happen, ideally?
The lens conversation, though, is when you're starting a project, especially on the consulting side. I've done some consulting, and you start. How do you have to start with a sort of different options, or are companies coming to you, this is a direction we want to go, how do we get there? I guess it's probably both, but how much at the beginning is it sort of a whiteboard?
Great question. I mean, I would love to see companies come to us earlier and, have that opportunity to talk.
I hear this answer a fair amount.
I'm sure you do, because a lot of the times, you have technical, these mining companies, they have technical teams that think about, again, it's often very focused around how to make the actual, extraction of the valuable commodity as optimal and efficient as possible. Like, they're not necessarily thinking about water considerations or community considerations or things like that. So, if a mining company's technical team gets too far down that project conceptualization road themselves, while
then you come in there and go, oh, but we could do it this way.
Yeah. Well, I just, being able to have that conversation and go, okay, well, I understand you want to put your mill right beside the portal for your underground mine here, but like, it's right beside the community, and you've just designed a building that's 200 meters tall, and you walk out the front door of the Legion in this town, and the first thing you see is like a big mill. That's probably not going to be well received in the community. So you can kind of identify some of those things early if you are brought in at that project conceptualization phase. I mean, it comes back to, my favorite phrase, negative compounds quicker than positive stuff. So, if you have this pile of issues.
I actually hope I hear him using it in a conversation.
I'm going to work it in as much as I can now. Yeah. No, I mean, if you kind of start with this pile of things that are going to be issues, now you're trying to think of ways to kind of walk it back or fix them. Yeah. But, if you're kind of starting with a blanker slate from the start and going, okay, like, what are our kind of core objectives here? How do we make sure that those are all met while mitigating what we see a lot, because we do this a lot with all kinds of different projects, all kinds of different communities. Like, these tend to be the hot button issues. So this in mind, how do we move your project towards achieving your goals while mitigating these as much as possible right out of the gate?
When they do something like they put their plant and it's a 200,
I mean, 200 meters might't have been a bit.
Yeah, that's
200 feet. Is 200 feet.
Yeah, I was thinking that's large. But that type of stuff, I mean, it's easy to think, oh, the mine's just not being considerate. That, of course, and that those types of things actually cause issues, because if it's taken the wrong way, now you got the issue happening. But is it just these mines also have so many moving parts, and it's hard. Again, even in my experience in management, you making decisions, you just can't. And is the key then they just have to get out they have to get people in sooner. Are you seeing it quite a bit where it's 2 months after maybe that conversation could have got started? I'm not picking on them. I'm just talking about it as a strategy.
No. I mean, it's a great thing to think about. And, I think to your point, there are a lot of moving parts, and it's hard to say like what is the exact right insertion point for a company like us to come and work with a client to go, okay, like this is the exact stage at which you need to be talking to people. Like no two projects are alike. I mean, like I said, there's some common hot button issues that you can, if you were a betting person, you could probably wager that, a couple of these items are going to be major concerns and they really want to see them addressed immediately. But no two projects are alike. So you kind of just have to get into it,
right?
And start workshopping it and getting through it,
and meet them essentially wherever they're at that moment. Yeah. What are you sort of expecting? Like, what are your goals over the next, 10 years with Falkirk? No, but day to day, when you come into this role, what is your expectation and your role going to entail?
Yeah, so I am going to be working a lot with water quantity and modeling and supporting water quality modeling inputs. I think that involves anything from the initial data management, understanding, and communication phase to building a model, to making sure the model is representative of the real world and works well. And then to communicating those results with people within the team, but also other consultants and the clients in a way that everyone can understand. It's easy to receive a bunch of numerical outputs from a model and think, okay, great, now I've got my results. But the next step in that is really making sure that they are understandable for whoever's looking at them, whoever your audience is.
So what would be an example of that? Water is, again, it's the thing that I talk about on the show, but I do not have your expertise in it. So what would be an example of that?
Of like the general process? Yeah. So I think just going step by step, when we're starting out, the goal is to collect data or review the data that we do have in such a way that we have enough to understand the environment that we're working in. So it's really important that we identify what data we need, what we have, and what might be missing. And then from there, we can start to build a model based on what we have. We can start making assumptions, educated assumptions, where we don't have hard data.
So sorry, what is the data? Like, what is it like again, I'm so far from water. It's like, is the data like water flow, water quantity, like landscape? I just trying to understand sort of what it actually would be getting collected.
Some of the key pieces of data would be stream flow data. So that would come from a hydrometric monitoring program. The water quality side will also look at what existing water quality data we have. So different concentrations. I won't speak too much to water quality because that's not quite my area, but it would for sure be looking at what already exists in the environment. We also are going to consider land use data. So in the watershed, if you have a catchment that is 90% natural environment, so it's not disturbed, and 10% disturbed, that's going to impact how water travels from the headwaters of that catchment to the outlet.
Disturbed would be what's an example of disturbed?
That could be mined area. So
okay.
Yeah, hard mined area, haul roads. Another key land use type would be waste rock. So where is waste rock being placed? Where is it going to be placed? And that really ties into the water quality aspects of modeling, because obviously water that runs off of mined waste rock is going to have a different type of chemical concentration, and we need to account for that in our models.
And so then what are they, and they're using that information to what then decide where assets are going to be developed? What would be examples of what actually gets done with that data? Yeah,
so once we've got a data set that we're happy with, then that would be carried over to the modeling. So we're going to build a model, calibrate it, validate it, and then use that data to look at a range of potential future scenarios based on what's changing in the project area. So could look at, depending on where our model boundaries are, we always want to set our model boundaries downstream of where the actual project area is, because water runs downstream, of course. The impacts from that mine are not just going to stop at the at the mine boundary. We have to look beyond that. So using those outlet points, we'll look at what the impact of the mine work is to the natural environment.
So, okay. And now this is what I'm trying to understand as well. Really from the consulting side is we do all these interviews about different technologies that are plugging into the mine. They're trying to plug in. It can be quite challenging sometimes to get them off the ground. We see that in safety as well. Great technologies that are hard to get into the mines. Are you also looking for technologies that will plug in and give them answers to these challenges they have? That's part one of the question. Part two, are there technologies out there that can get mines from ones that aren't going to get off the ground to, if we had this system, it could work? Again, I know this is a massive question and not just a simple answer, but I'm just curious based on other shows that I've done.
No, it is a fair question. And, the mining industry, I would say, has traditionally been quite slow to adopt new technologies.
I feel like they're getting quicker, though.
I agree. And I'm happy to see that, So, again, my background is a bit colored and biased based. My opinion is biased and colored from my background. But, before joining Falkirk, I worked for a water treatment company. So, a lot of the outputs from these models, one of the core uses of those is to develop the design basis for the water treatment system that is going to end up treating the water so that whatever gets discharged past the mine boundary that Nadia mentioned and makes its way downstream is of a sufficient quality that it's not going to be, harmful to any downstream users. So, I think that there's most water treatment plants out there right now are using kind of the same technology that's been tried and true and used for the last 50 or 60 years. And I am optimistic that there are going to be some new water treatment technologies coming out, in terms of active treatment, but also, finding ways to implement semi-passive and passive treatment and, designing. It's not even so much a technology thing as much as it is just kind of rethinking how the mines are designed. So if you think of the old perspective of water management, the mine site's basically just a big funnel, and any water that basically crosses the boundary into the mine site, ends up at the top of the funnel, and it all just kind of gets collected into one single pond. And then you put one water treatment plant down at the bottom of that funnel. But, you look at the quantity of water that needs to be treated and the increasingly stringent, justifiably water quality requirements for what you're discharging. That approach sometimes now is ending up in water treatment plants that are, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, which, again, when you're working with a client who thinks, okay, we're going to, we'll put a $5 million placeholder on our project budget for a water treatment plant. And then they wait a long time and they're kind of at the 11th hour of their feasibility study. And they bring in a water treatment group and go, okay, now someone needs to cost out this plant. And what they thought was going to be $5 million is 50 or 80 or 100. That could throw the numbers financially on your project in a major way, Right. So I think that going forward, there needs to be more consideration for how mines are designed and laid out, appreciating the fact that a lot of these mines, it's not like they're in big, wide open fields with endless real estate to work with. Like, they're typically in pretty challenging environments, big valleys and a lot of topography. So, you're kind of, you have to play with the hand that you're
quite
dealt.
a dance.
It's a tough problem to solve, but, thinking more kind of holistically about how water is dealt with on site, and are there opportunities to, implement source control measures where you're addressing a specific contaminant at the point that it's introduced, or are there opportunities to kind of decentralize water treatment and treat a little bit for one contaminant here and treat a little bit for another contaminant there, instead of having one big plant at the bottom that treats all water for all constituents? Like, there are opportunities there, I think, to A, implement new technologies as they come out, and B, just
right, because then the investment is separated out, not all lumped into one facility.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, like, not to get too specific and technical, but like, if you look at
our audience, likes specific and technical.
Well, let's go for it then. Like, when you think of mining activity, when mines are blasting either underground to, open new ground and develop underground passageways and subsequently bring the ore out, or even in an open pit mine, any blasting right now introduces these nitrogen species. So you've got nitrate, nitrite, ammonia. Sometimes that can degrade to cyanide. So you have these really challenging nitrogen species that typically are only introduced by one activity. And it just so happens that treating those nitrogen species can be quite costly, so can you kind of look upstream and identify the specific points in the mine workings where those contaminants are introduced and address them there, instead of waiting until they kind of make it and contaminate the larger pool of water? And then now you have to deal with, instead of a relatively small quantity of water that's contaminated with this, now you have a much larger volume that it's managed to make its way into, and you need a much larger treatment system to treat for that specific constituent. So, looking at source control, looking at decentralizing water treatment, instead of looking at it as a single water treatment plant, more of like a water treatment system across the whole site. Are there opportunities to, like I said before, implement these semi-passive and passive treatment systems, which tend to require a lot of footprint and real estate, which is challenging. But at the same time, if you can find ways to implement them right, they can be quite cost effective, lower maintenance, and especially when you look into closure of mines, are a much more palatable way of managing water if there are kind of long-term treatment requirements.
How optimistic are you in? I'll do a two-part question. Is the information, Nadia, I'll ask this question to you first. When you're looking at the data and what technology is available now, how you can communicate it, and Ryan, you both just sort of jump in on this. The permitting side, are we at a stage? Well, I guess it's a little unfair. 2 months into the mining industry, so sorry. Are we at a stage, do you think, circling back to my earlier comments about can it get us all on the same page? That some of these mines that we don't have to take 15 years to get, if we know what the answer is, we know how to communicate it, can we get to a place where some of these mines actually get going? Because if they don't get going, it is a thing. If they don't get going, someone else is going to do it in some other country without the regulations. So we can sit here and pretend that we're doing something good, but it gets to a point where there's a point where we're doing what is right by being careful, and then it gets to a point where we're actually essentially being lazy with our resources and just not developing. Mm-hmm. Both your thoughts. Nadia, start with your thoughts.
Maybe I'll jump in first. And
please. Ryan, yeah, I could go all day on this. So you go before I get spun up.
From the earlier stages, just thinking about data management, and you're talking about tools to get things, moving faster. I think I am optimistic so far from what I've seen. Just looking at the data libraries that we do currently have, data collection is improving, and the availability of information on watersheds that we have is growing, which is great because ultimately that's what supports our understanding of what's going on within that watershed. And once we have that understanding, then we can move forward and progress things. I'm really optimistic, especially at Falkirk, because I think the skill set we have within our team is really strong in using data management tools that are super innovative. Also participating on the research and scientific development side of things, where we're not only building, these tools for ourselves, but also for the industry and contributing to the industry to help data management become a more manageable thing. Because when you think about the quantities of data that goes into these types of assessments, it's massive, and that can easily become almost too much. And at that point, then it becomes hard to take lessons away from that and understanding. Right. So
good point.
From the data side, I think I'm optimistic. I think we're getting very efficient at managing those large data sets and pulling out the information that we do need.
I wish that was a great answer. I wished it had to come from my question, which should have been, are we getting better at managing data? But you helped me out with a bad question. So thank you. Ryan, over to you.
I mean, yeah, to get back to your, how do we make things go faster? And I don't know these exact, I'm paraphrasing rather than quoting, but like, you hear our government officials talk about, when being faced with the fact that it takes, 15 plus years to bring a mine from discovery into production. Like, at least I would argue it's more than that. they go, okay, well, we need to accelerate the development of our natural resources, and we want to cut that down from 15 years to 5, but we're also not going to compromise at all on the rigor of the environmental review and the scrutiny that these projects come under. So, how do you reconcile those two perspectives of, we want to, and again, justifiably so, the water quality restrictions, or I shouldn't say restrictions, water quality discharge requirements are getting to a higher standard, I should say. There's more and more review going on. More and more people are becoming involved in the review process. So how do you deal with a system that is becoming more stringent in terms of quality and more complex in terms of the number of people involved, and then also make it happen faster? So how do we solve that problem? And I think I'm hopeful that, just to Nadia's point about data and transparency, building trust in, communities and in reviewers and regulators, that we're not trying to pull wool over anybody's eyes. Like, we're actually putting the correct amount of scientific due process, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, into these processes. And we're ready to be transparent with our data and our processes and our outcomes, and just lay out all the cards on the table and go, look, like, we're not trying to hide anything here.
Yeah.
This is what we developed. Like, review it, put it through your process, submit it to the level of scrutiny you think is required. But, something right now has to give in the process. And I think, unfortunately, a big part of it is just, government ministries having a hard time resourcing themselves. Like, they're resource constrained. They only have a certain number of people who are reviewing a ton of different projects, and
they got to find people that understand the information.
And that's the thing, is you need it to be reviewed by experts. So, and I'm not saying that our counterparts at the ministries are not experts and don't know what they're talking about,
but they're people. That's the one thing. They don't have a magic pill. They're people learning it as they go as well. Yeah, exactly.
So, there are people that you work with who at times are seeing some things for the first time, and you have to kind of slow down and go through it and make sure everybody understands and there's no confusion and everyone's on the same page before you can move forward. But at the same time, we have to find a way to make that happen kind of faster and in a more frictionless way. So I'm hopeful that, increased transparency and data availability and better data management can hopefully be one of the pieces of the puzzle that gets us to that point.
Do you think, just to, sort of get to the tail end of this interview, but I just want to quickly ask you, do you think what you're talking about, Nadia, better use of the data, and I think that goes to better presentation of the data, be able to sort of sift through it before the clients are seeing it, and equipping the ministry and, better communication. Does that translate? And I'm not going to say to all Indigenous communities. I think that's part of the problem with even asking a question like that is part of the issue, that because you're successful with one Indigenous community, the next culture could be completely different, literally an hour down the road.
Less even.
Yeah, or less. Are you seeing more examples of better relationships with Indigenous communities? As I guess what I'm trying to ask.
Good question. I think that how do I phrase this? I would say that companies are getting better at, engaging with First Nations and Indigenous communities in the right way, and that is the way that they want to be engaged with. Like, a lot of times you have these again, it's kind of back to that very like Western corporate schedule, milestone based. Okay, we need to get this done by this time, and okay, well, we need to schedule a meeting with the First Nation, and let's make it 6 weeks before this milestone so we make sure they're on board. But what they want is they want you to be in their community, getting to know them and building trust for years.
Yeah, showing up at 11 o'clock and having an hour and a half to meet that's not engagement.
No, it's not. And like, it can feel very transactional, and that is the opposite of how Indigenous communities want to be treated and dealt with. So, I think I alluded earlier to, Christy Smith and her team at our company, that they do incredible work in engaging with Indigenous communities and First Nations, and, building those relationships and that depth of trust, so that, you get to the point where when you actually bring an issue forward, you have the relationship where they don't think that you're just kind of some transactional person who's there to pull the wool over your eyes and just get you to say what you need to say to be able to move it forward, you know? So I think that it's super important to, I think you said earlier, meet them where they're at. You know, some nations have a ton of capacity. They have a bunch of technical folks. They have people in the community that understand this stuff, and that, you know, some other nations have a lands department that's like 1 or 2 people in an office, you know, and they're learning everything as they go. They're not, they like the number of things that they have come across their desk, they couldn't possibly be experts on all of it, you know? So, you know, sitting down with these communities and these people and making sure that they understand it, and kind of slowing down and explaining things and making sure that they're totally on board with things and, you know, understand what you're presenting to them, and bringing in third-party experts sometimes even as required, so that they can have that level of comfort that you're helping them understand to be able to move forward, I think is super important.
And then just to wrap up, I wanted to ask some of the investment in it. Is there, for mining companies that are trying to develop the, you know, sort of that next level of water stewardship? See, I'm learning. I'm not using the word management. That are there like grants available? Are there avenues that people can go that it maybe eases up the financial investment of doing it right?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, there's you know, there's a lot of grants out there right now kind of focused on the mining industry. You know, I wish there were more that were more specific to water. Like a lot of the themes right now there's a few core themes to the kind of grant funding landscape right now in terms of government programs is, you know, anything critical minerals is, you know, it's very hot right now. They want to make sure critical minerals are happening. Decarbonization is a huge thing. But, you know, where I see an opportunity to kind of fold the water piece in is there's a lot of good funding around indigenous capacity building. So, you know, I think there are opportunities to, you know, pursue funding to help with that education and that capacity building within First Nations communities and indigenous communities to, you know, have a better technical understanding of the water issues that are being brought to them and the potential issues that could arise from development in their lands. But, you know, I do think that I would like to see more kind of direct government grant funding opportunities available specific to the water stewardship.
Right. And we're not seeing as much of that now.
I mean, you know, they're out there, but they're definitely not being kind of celebrated and communicated to the extent that, you know, the critical minerals strategy.
Right. It should be part of the pillars.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. There's so much to cover. Nadia, we need to have you back in like a year once you get just bombarded with the mining industry. But I have to say, we covered a lot of ground. That the data part that you said that's something that stood out to me, because we have a lot of episodes about data just inundating, and just that skill and both the technology to actually facilitate it properly. That's going to be a really interesting thing to follow over the next few years. And then, community, like what you just said about these pillars, money needs to follow demand. You can't just say, well, we need to be good stewards. It does take money, and you need to incentivize that. So that's another important thing I hope we can follow along. So thank you both for coming in. I appreciate it. And I hope we do it again, and hopefully not too long, because I feel like we just sort of, in the first episode too, you scratch the surface on these and then realize, oh, there's about 10 more topics we could have covered. But thank you both, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Of course, you can connect directly with Ryan or Nadia. We'll have a link to their LinkedIn in the description. You can follow Falkirk on LinkedIn. You can check out their website and, of course, connect with their team if you want more information. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode of Mining Now.